I'm Martha, 32 female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, a place I earned through long hours and careful financial planning. As a financial analyst, my life revolves around numbers, logic, and predictable outcomes. For years, I was the one my family turned to for stability, the one who always had a plan, and more importantly, the one who always had the funds to bail them out. But I was about to learn that my value to them was calculated only in dollars and cents. And when it came to a major family event, my own brother's wedding, I wasn't even worth an invitation. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My role in the family was defined early on. I was the responsible one, the serious one. My younger brother, Miles, was the charming one, the one who could fail upwards with a smile and a shrug. Our mother, Beatrice, enabled it all. While I was studying for exams and working part-time jobs through college, Miles was racking up credit card, debt on trips he couldn't afford and gadgets he didn't need. And every single time, our mother would call me. "Martha, honey," she'd start, her voice a practiced blend of gentle persuasion and subtle guilt. "Miles is in a bit of a pickle. You know how he is. Could you just help him out this once? He'll pay you back." He never did, not once. In the beginning, I kept a spreadsheet. I'm a financial analyst, after all. It's what I do. I logged every loan, every spot, every just until my next paycheck with dates and amounts. The total grew alarmingly fast. A few hundred for a car repair. 1,000 for a security deposit on an apartment he was evicted from 6 months later. 500 because he'd overdrawn his account right before a big date. When the total surpassed 5 figures, I stopped tracking. It was too depressing. It felt less like a ledger of loans and more like a record of my own foolishness. My father passed away when I was in college, leaving a modest life insurance policy. My mother, Beatrice, who had been a homemaker for most of her life, was terrible with money. She saw the payout as a windfall, not a lifeline. It was gone within 2 years, spent on a new car, lavish vacations for herself and Miles, and investments in his get-rich-quick schemes. Once the insurance money vanished, I became the new safety net. I just landed my first serious job, and my starting salary, which felt like a fortune to me, was seen as a communal resource by them. The dynamic was simple. I was the provider, and they were the recipients. I paid for my mother's emergency root canal. I co-signed for Miles's car, a car I ended up making payments on for a full year after he forgot. I funded my mother's move to a new apartment when her landlord raised the rent. There was never a thank you that felt sincere. It was always followed by an air of expectation, as if I were simply fulfilling my designated duty. Conversations with them rarely touched on my life, my work, or my happiness. They were almost always a preamble to a request for money. "How's that big firm treating you, sweetie?" "That's wonderful," my mother would say. "By the way, the refrigerator just went out." The most frustrating part was how they viewed my success. They didn't see the years of sacrifice, the missed parties, the all-nighters studying for certification exams. They saw a magic money tree. They believed that because I was good with numbers, money just appeared in my account. They had no concept of budgeting, saving, or the stress of financial responsibility. My prudence was their opportunity. When I tried to offer advice, to teach Miles how to create a budget or help my mother find a more affordable living situation, I was met with blank stares or outright dismissal. "Oh, Martha, don't be so boring," Miles would say with a laugh. "You have to live a little." My mother would just sigh and say, "It's all so complicated. You're the smart one, you handle it." This financial drain had a profound impact on my own life. I delayed buying a home because my down payment fund was constantly being depleted. I put off vacations, telling friends I was too busy with work when, in reality, I was covering yet another of Miles's emergencies. I felt like I was running a marathon with weights tied to my ankles, while my family cheered from the sidelines, occasionally asking me to run a little faster so they could keep up their comfortable pace. The arrival of Megan, Miles's fiancée, only amplified the problem. Megan was a social media influencer, a profession that, to me, seemed to consist of taking glamorous photos in expensive clothes and at exotic locations, all things I knew Miles couldn't afford. She was beautiful, bubbly, and completely oblivious to, or willfully ignorant of, their financial reality. She saw me less as the charismatic, successful man he pretended to be, and my mother adored her for it. Megan's entire online persona was built on an aesthetic of luxury and effortless living. She fit perfectly into the family's fantasy world, a world where bills didn't exist and credit was infinite. Whenever Megan was around, the requests for money became more frequent and more brazen. Suddenly, it wasn't just about covering bills, it was about funding a lifestyle. Megan's birthday is coming up and I want to get her that designer bag she's been hinting at, Miles would tell me. It'll be great for her brand. Can you front me the cash? Or from my mother, Megan thinks the old dining set is so drab. We're having her parents over for dinner and we need to make a good impression. I saw a beautiful one on sale. I tried to say no, I really did, but the emotional blackmail was an art form in my family. Saying no meant I was selfish. It meant I didn't love them. It meant I was hoarding my money and looking down on them. The arguments were exhausting. They would twist my words, paint me as the villain, the cold-hearted sister who wouldn't help her family in their time of need. It was easier, most of the time, to just give in, to transfer the money and buy myself a few weeks of peace. But with each transaction, a piece of my respect for them, and for myself, chipped away. I was no longer a daughter or a sister. I was an ATM, and I was starting to run out of cash and patience. The foundation for what was to come was built on years of these transactions, each one a brick in a wall that was slowly, but surely, closing me off from them entirely. The talk about the wedding started subtly. My mother would drop hints in our phone calls, casual mentions of venues and guest lists. Megan has her heart set on a spring wedding, she'd say, or Miles is looking at suits this weekend. Each mention felt like a test, a way to gauge my reaction, but it was never followed by a direct question or an invitation for my opinion. It was information relayed to me, not shared with me. I was an observer, not a participant. As the months went on, the wedding planning kicked into high gear. My mother's calls became exclusively about the wedding. She'd gush about Megan's dress, the floral arrangements, the ridiculously expensive catering company they'd hired. She spoke of we and us when referring to the planning, a tight-knit circle that clearly didn't include me. We found the most perfect venue, Martha. It's a bit of a splurge, but Megan says it's all about the aesthetic for her followers. A splurge was a word I knew all too well. It was a family code word for something Martha will eventually have to pay for. I braced myself for the inevitable request for a contribution to the wedding fund, but surprisingly, it never came. This silence was more unsettling than the requests. It was a deviation from the established pattern. My financial utility seemed to be on hold, and I couldn't figure out why. I tried to be involved. I'd ask questions, offer suggestions. Have you guys thought about a wedding planner? I know a great one who's very budget conscious, I offered once. My mother brushed it off. Oh, Megan and I have it all under control, dear. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. The condescension was thick. It was a clear message. Your input, like your presence, is not required. My best friend Kevin, a lawyer with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, saw the writing on the wall long before I did. They're using you, Martha, he'd say over our weekly dinners. You're the family bank, but they don't want the bank teller showing up to the party. It would ruin the illusion that they can afford all this on their own. I defended them, of course. It's what you do when you're trapped in a cycle of dysfunction. They're just busy, Kevin. A wedding is a lot of work. They'll include me when things calm down. He just shook his head, a look of pity in his eyes that I hated. The first concrete sign that I was being intentionally excluded came when I heard about the engagement party. My aunt called me, asking what I was planning to wear. Where to what? I asked, confused. The line went silent for a moment. To the engagement party, sweetie. This Saturday. Beatrice didn't tell you. My heart sank. My aunt quickly tried to cover for them, stammering about lost invitations and my mother being forgetful, but we both knew the truth. It wasn't a mistake. I confronted my mother, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. Her excuse was flimsy and insulting. Oh, honey, it was just a small thing for Megan's friends. We knew you'd be so busy with work. We didn't want to bother you. Bother me? I had funded her entire life for the last decade, but my presence at my own brother's engagement party was a bother. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in passive-aggressive exclusion. I'd see photos on Megan's social media of the bridal shower, the bachelor party weekend, the dress fittings. All events I learned about after the fact, through a screen. Miles, my brother, was a ghost. He didn't return my calls or answer my texts. When I did manage to get him on the phone, his voice was distant, his answers vague. He was a puppet, and Megan and my mother were pulling the strings. The final, undeniable proof came in the mail. Or rather, it didn't. Wedding season was in full swing, and my mailbox was filled with ornate invitations for friends and colleagues. But the one I was waiting for, the one from my own brother, never arrived. I waited and waited, telling myself it was lost, delayed. I checked my address with my mother. "Yes, dear, we have the right one," she said, her voice unnervingly cheerful. Days turned into a week, then two. The RSVP date, which I saw on a photo of the invitation someone had posted online, came and went. The snub was no longer unspoken. It was a gaping, screaming silence in my life. It was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. They had taken everything they could from me for years, and now that they were planning the biggest performance of their lives, they had decided I didn't fit the part. I was the ghost at their feast, the silent benefactor whose name was not to be mentioned. The pain of it was profound. It wasn't about wanting to go to a wedding. It was about the complete and utter invalidation of my role in the family, of my very existence to them. I had been their pillar, their safety net, their emergency contact. I had sacrificed my own dreams to fund theirs, and my reward was to be cast aside like a used-up credit card. Kevin was right. The bank teller wasn't invited to the party. The realization was cold and hard, and it settled deep in my chest. But as the hurt began to subside, it was replaced by something else, something cold and clear. Resolve. The unspoken snub had finally spoken a truth I could no longer ignore. In the quiet aftermath of the non-invitation, I retreated into a state of numb disbelief. I focused on work, pulling long hours and burying myself in spreadsheets and market analyses. It was easier to deal with the predictable logic of numbers than the chaotic, painful illogic of my family. I muted my mother and Megan on all social media platforms, not wanting to see the cheerful, curated updates about a life from which I had been so thoroughly banished. My silence was a shield. I didn't call them, and they didn't call me. The dynamic had shifted. The ATM was closed for business, and since they didn't need any withdrawals, they had no reason to reach out. The peace, however, was short-lived. It was shattered by a single, careless post. I was scrolling through my feed one evening when a post from a distant cousin popped up. It was a photo from Megan's lavish bridal shower, an event I had only known about from whispers. My cousin had tagged everyone in the photo, and out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist, I clicked on the profile of one of Megan's bridesmaids, someone I didn't know. Her profile was public, a treasure trove of wedding-related content. And there it was, a post from several weeks prior. It was a screenshot of a group chat, clearly from the bridal party. Megan had obviously sent it to her friend, who had then posted it to celebrate their friendship, adding a caption filled with heart emojis and fawning praise. "Getting to plan this wedding with my bestie has been a dream. She has such a clear vision." But the bridesmaid had been careless. She hadn't cropped the image properly. At the very top of the screenshot, a snippet of a previous conversation was visible. It was a message from Megan. It read, "Absolutely not inviting Martha. She's literally the family buzzkill and would just spend the whole time judging everything. We need to get the final payment for the venue from her before the invites go out though, so everyone be nice until then lol." I stared at my phone, the screen light illuminating my stunned face. The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't just a snub. It was a premeditated, financially motivated strategy. I wasn't just uninvited. I was a mark, a target, the final hurdle to clear before they could celebrate without me. The lull at the end of the message was like a tiny digital knife twisting in my gut. My pain, my exclusion, was a joke to them. My mind raced back through the past few months, the sudden silence on the money front, the vague, cheerful phone calls from my mother, the way they had avoided any direct confrontation. It all clicked into place. They hadn't stopped needing money, they had simply been playing a long game. The final payment for the venue. I did a quick search. The venue they had chosen was notoriously expensive. The final payment would be a significant sum, likely tens of thousands of dollars. They had been nice to me, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to approach me for one last, massive withdrawal before cutting me off completely. But something must have gone wrong with their plan. The request for the venue payment never came. Why? What had changed? Had they found another source of funding? Or had they simply decided they could manage without my contribution, making my exclusion even more personal and less transactional? I saved the screenshot, my hands shaking. This was the proof. This was the undeniable black and white evidence of their deception. For years, I had allowed myself to believe their excuses, to accept their narrative that I was too sensitive or reading too much into things. I had internalized their gaslighting, questioning my own perceptions. But this was different. This was a calculated plot, laid bare by a stranger's carelessness. My hurt began to curdle into a cold, hard anger. It was a clarifying anger, a feeling so pure and potent it burned away all the confusion and self-doubt. They didn't see me as a sister or a daughter. They saw me as an obstacle with a bank account, a problem to be managed, someone to be used and discarded. I immediately called Kevin. I sent him the screenshot and explained the situation, my voice low and steady. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. When he finally spoke, there was no "I told you so" in his tone. There was only quiet fury on my behalf. "Martha, this is monstrous," he said, "but it's also a gift. They've shown you exactly who they are. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," I whispered, the anger momentarily giving way to a wave of exhaustion. "What can I do?" "You can do a lot," he replied, his voice firm. "You can protect yourself. They've been playing checkers, thinking they're so clever. It's time for you to start playing chess. We need to figure out what they're up to, what their financial situation really is. They underestimated you, Martha. They think you're just a pushover with a checkbook. They've forgotten that you're smarter than all of them combined." His words resonated deep within me. He was right. They had made a critical error. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had seen my generosity as an endless resource they were entitled to. The social media slip-up wasn't just an embarrassment for them, it was an awakening for me. It was the spark that would ignite a fire they never saw coming. They thought they had gotten rid of the family buzzkill. They had no idea they had just created their worst nightmare. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. Armed with the screenshot and a newfound sense of purpose, I switched from grieving sister to forensic analyst. My grief and hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but I channeled them into a focused, analytical energy. Kevin's words echoed in my head, "It's time for you to start playing chess." My entire career was built on finding patterns in chaos, on digging through data to find the truth hidden beneath the surface. I would now apply those same skills to my own family. My first step was to understand their actual financial situation. For years, I had been the willing patch on a sinking ship, plugging leaks without ever looking at the size of the hole. I had a rough idea of their debts from the loans I'd given, but I needed the full picture. I started with public records, a surprisingly effective tool. I ran a search on my mother's property records. She lived in a rental, but I discovered a recent lien against her for unpaid utility bills. It was a small amount, but it was a clear indicator of financial distress. Next, I did a search for court records. A shiver went down my spine when I found it. Miles had been sued by a credit card company 6 months ago for an outstanding balance of nearly $15,000. He had settled, but the record was there. This was a debt he had never mentioned, one he was clearly trying to handle or ignore on his own. The pieces started to come together. This wasn't just about my family living beyond their means. This was a portrait of people drowning in debt. Miles's job as a tech sales rep sounded impressive, but a quick search on professional networking sites revealed he had switched companies 3 times in the last 2 years. That wasn't the sign of a rising star. It was the sign of someone who couldn't hold down a job, likely because his performance couldn't match his charm. He was probably living on commission, with long, dry spells between paychecks. And then there was Megan, the social media influencer. Her entire life was a carefully constructed fantasy. I spent an evening scrolling through her endless feed of perfection. Photos of her at 5-star hotels, on tropical beaches, holding designer bags. Each post was a performance, complete with tags for brands and sponsors. But I noticed something my analytical brain picked up on immediately. The sponsorships were from small, often obscure brands. There were no major labels, no blue-chip companies. She was a micro-influencer at best, projecting an image of success that was likely costing her far more to maintain than she was earning. The bags were probably rented. The vacations were likely financed on credit. The wedding, I realized, was the ultimate performance. It was the centerpiece of her brand, the pinnacle of the fantasy she was selling to her followers. A lavish, no-expense-spared wedding would be a content goldmine, elevating her status and attracting more lucrative sponsorships. It wasn't just a marriage, it was a business investment. And like all her other investments, it was being funded with money she didn't have. This brought me back to the central mystery, the venue payment. If they were so desperate for cash, why hadn't they asked me for it as planned? I had to assume they had found the money elsewhere. But where? My mother had no assets. Miles was being chased by creditors. It didn't make sense. I decided to take a risk. I logged into my mother's email account. It was a huge violation of her privacy, but I felt I had no choice. Her password, ridiculously, was Miles's birthday. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by what I found. I searched for emails from the wedding venue. There they were, a string of invoices and increasingly frantic payment reminders. The final payment of $20,000 was now past due. But then I found another email thread, this one between my mother and her brother, my Uncle David. It was a long, pleading email from my mother, asking for a loan. She spun a story about a short-term cash flow problem and promised to pay him back as soon as Martha's investment matures. I felt my blood run cold. She was using my name, my financial reputation, to secure a loan from another family member, all while planning to exclude me. His reply was gentle but firm. He explained that he couldn't lend them such a large amount of money. So, the venue was still unpaid. This made no sense. The wedding was just over a week away. How could they possibly be proceeding if they hadn't paid their biggest vendor? The answer came to me in the middle of the night. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. It was so audacious, so recklessly confident that I almost couldn't believe it. They didn't have the money. They had no plan to get the money. They were going to pay for it on the day of the wedding. With a credit card. Their plan, I surmised, was breathtaking in its arrogance. They would string the venue along, making promises and excuses. On the day of the event, when the tables were set, the flowers were arranged, and the guests were arriving, the venue would have no choice but to let the wedding proceed. At the end of the night, when the bill came due, they would try to pay with a credit card. They were likely planning to use multiple cards, hoping to split the cost across several high-limit accounts. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble. And that's when I finally understood my role. I wasn't the primary source of funding anymore. I was the emergency backup. Their credit cards were almost certainly maxed out. Their plan was to try them, and when they were inevitably declined, the frantic, tearful phone call would come to me. They would be at the venue, surrounded by guests, facing utter humiliation. The pressure on me would be immense. How could I say no? How could I let my brother's wedding end in disaster, with the police potentially being called over an unpaid bill? They weren't just excluding me from the wedding. They were casting me in the role of the last-minute savior, a role I would be forced to play to avoid a public family catastrophe. The audacity of it took my breath away. It was a perfectly designed trap, and the screenshot from the bridesmaids' chat was the key. "We need to get the final payment for the venue from her," Megan had written. Their original plan A had been to get the money from me up front. When I started pulling back and they sensed I was becoming less compliant, they had shifted to plan B, securing a loan from my uncle. When that failed, they were left with only one option, the riskiest of all. Plan C was the credit card gamble, with me as their unwilling safety net. Connecting the dots didn't just give me clarity, it gave me a roadmap of their intentions. They had laid a trap for me, but in their arrogance. They had left the blueprints lying around for me to find. Now, I could build a trap of my own. The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding were the calm before the storm. My family maintained their radio silence, and so did I. This quiet period gave me the space I needed to move from a position of reaction to one of action. The emotional turmoil, the hurt, the anger, the betrayal, was still present, but I compartmentalized it. I had a problem to solve, a scenario to game out. I was a financial analyst, and this was the most important analysis of my life. My first call was back to Kevin. I laid out my theory: the unpaid venue, the maxed-out credit cards, and my designated role as the 911 call when it all came crashing down. "It's a classic narcissist's gambit," Kevin said, his voice grim. "They create a high-pressure, public crisis and expect you to fold to avoid the shared embarrassment. It's emotional blackmail of the highest order." "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "When they call, and I know they will, what do I say?" "You need a plan, Martha," he advised. "A simple, clear, and legally sound plan. You need to be prepared so that when the call comes, you're not reacting emotionally. You're executing a strategy." His advice was the anchor I needed. Strategy, that was a language I understood. My first strategic move was to secure my own finances. This wasn't just about protecting my money, it was about severing the lifeline they believed they were still entitled to. I went to my bank and spoke with the manager. I explained that I had reason to believe my financial information might be compromised by family members and that I was concerned about potential fraudulent activity. Together, we put a verbal password on my account. No transaction over a certain limit, no wire transfer, and no access to account information could be done without that password, whether in person or over the phone. I chose a word that had no significance to my family, something they could never guess. It was a simple step, but it felt like building the first wall of a fortress. Next, I turned to my credit cards. This was the part of the plan that required careful timing. I knew the call from the wedding would come in the evening, once the reception was in full swing and the venue manager was demanding payment. My plan had to be something irreversible, something that couldn't be undone with a quick phone call from me if I caved under pressure. I gathered all my credit cards, the 2 I used regularly and the one I kept for emergencies. They all had high limits, high enough to cover a significant portion of a wedding bill. These were the cards my family knew about, the ones I had used in the past to pay for their various emergencies. The day before the wedding, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. I used an online payment service to pay a few of my own bills with each card, creating a clear record of legitimate use. This was important. I needed to show that the cards were active and in my possession right up until the wedding day. On the morning of the wedding, I did nothing. I went to the gym. I had brunch with Kevin. I tried my best to act normal, though my stomach was in knots. I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Kevin was a rock, reminding me of my purpose. "You are not responsible for the consequences of their actions," he repeated, like a mantra. "They built this. You're just choosing not to set yourself on fire to keep them warm." As the afternoon wore on, my anxiety grew. I imagined the scene: the guests arriving, the music playing, my brother and his new wife smiling for photos, all while a financial time bomb ticked beneath them. They were so confident, so sure of their power over me, that they couldn't conceive of a world where I wouldn't come to their rescue. Their arrogance was my greatest weapon. At 5:00 p.m., approximately the time the ceremony would be starting, I made the most important call of the day. I called the fraud department of my first credit card company. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and practiced. I need to report my card as stolen. I believe my wallet was taken within the last hour. I provided the necessary details. The representative was efficient and professional. The card was immediately deactivated, and a new one was scheduled to be sent. I repeated the process with my second credit card company and then the third. Within the span of 15 minutes, I had successfully and legitimately reported all of my high-limit credit cards as stolen. They were now nothing more than useless pieces of plastic. There was no going back. I couldn't call and say, "Oops, I found them." The fraud protection process was in motion. With the final call made, a profound sense of calm washed over me. I had done it. I had taken control. For the first time in my adult life, I had preemptively protected myself from my family's financial recklessness. I had cut the cord. There was no safety net for them to fall into because I had just set it on fire. I ordered dinner, put on a movie, and settled onto my couch with my phone beside me, face up on the coffee table. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the mouse to walk into it. The inevitable was coming, but for the first time, I wasn't dreading it. I was ready for it. The phone rang at precisely 9:47 p.m. I had been watching the clock, my heart thumping a steady, anxious rhythm against my ribs. I knew it would be late enough for the party to be in full swing, but early enough that the venue manager would be starting to press for payment before staff began to leave for the night. The caller ID flashed Mom. Of course, Miles would never have the guts to make this call himself. He would send our mother to do his dirty work, just as he always had. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a final, deep breath to steady my nerves. "Hello," I said, my voice deliberately neutral. "Martha, thank God you answered." Beatrice's voice was high-pitched, a frantic, screeching sound that was a stark contrast to her usual syrupy sweet tone. In the background, I could hear the tinny, muffled sound of music and the chatter of a large crowd. The party was still going. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "It's a disaster, an absolute disaster," she wailed. "We're here at the wedding, and the manager is being just awful. He's demanding we pay the final bill right now, and," she took a shaky breath. "Our cards were declined, all of them. I think their machine must be broken or something." The lie was so predictable, so transparent. A broken machine wouldn't decline every single one of their cards. They were maxed out, just as I had predicted. I remained silent, letting her frantic energy fill the space. "Martha, are you there?" she pressed, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'm here," I said quietly. "Honey, I hate to ask you this, I really do, especially after, well, I know we've been so busy, but we are in a terrible situation. The manager is threatening to call the police if we don't pay. Can you please just give me your credit card number? Just for this one thing. We will pay you back, I swear on your father's grave." The mention of my father was a low blow, a last-ditch effort to pull at whatever heartstrings she thought I had left. But the strings had been cut. I listened to the party in the background, the laughter, the clinking glasses. I pictured them all there, my brother, his new wife, my extended family, all celebrating a union I was not deemed worthy to witness. They were calling me from inside the party I wasn't invited to, asking me to pay the cover charge. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, savoring the panic I could feel radiating through the phone. I was speechless, but not for the reason she thought. I was speechless at the culmination of a lifetime of being used, at the final, desperate move in their long con. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm, clear, and devoid of emotion. "I can't, Mom." "What do you mean you can't?" she shrieked. "Martha, this is not the time for games. Your brother's wedding will be ruined. They're going to be arrested." "I mean, I can't give you my card number," I repeated, my voice as steady as stone. "I can't give it to you because I don't have it. My wallet was stolen earlier today. I had to cancel everything. I've just reported all my cards as stolen." Dead silence on the other end of the line. The muffled party music seemed to get louder, a festive soundtrack to her crumbling world. I could almost hear the gears in her brain grinding to a halt, processing the information, realizing that her last-ditch, foolproof plan had just exploded in her face. "Stolen," she finally whispered, the word sounding hollow. "And foreign, you're lying." "Why would I lie about that, Mom?" I asked, and for the first time, I allowed a hint of cold anger to seep into my voice. "My wallet is gone. My cards are deactivated. There is nothing I can do." "You did this on purpose," she hissed, the victim act melting away to reveal the venomous, entitled woman underneath. "You planned this. This is your revenge for not being invited." "Invited?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. I seemed to have forgotten. Was I supposed to be somewhere tonight? You know, it's funny. For someone who didn't want the family buzzkill at the party, you seem pretty desperate for my help now. I heard a gasp on the other end. She knew that I knew. The screenshot. It all came crashing down on her. The lie was exposed, the manipulation laid bare. "How?" she started, but I cut her off. "It doesn't matter how," I said. "What matters is this: you made a decision, you and Miles and Megan. You decided I wasn't family enough to be invited to the wedding, but I was still the family bank, expected to be on call for when your reckless plans fell apart. You don't get to have it both ways. You made your bed, Mom. Now you get to lie in it. Or, in this case, pay for it." I could hear a man's voice in the background now, sharp and angry. The manager. Then I heard Miles's voice pleading, "Mom, what's going on? Did she give it to you?" My mother's voice dropped to a choked whisper. "She knows, Miles. She knows everything." That was all I needed to hear. My job was done. I had not yelled. I had not screamed. I had simply stated the facts. I had withdrawn my consent to be their emergency plan. "I have to go now," I said calmly. "Good luck with the bill." And before she could respond, before she could unleash another torrent of abuse or pathetic pleas, I ended the call. I blocked her number, then Miles's number. I sat in the silent darkness of my apartment, the phone resting on my lap. The silence was profound. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on a lifetime of exploitation. It was the sound of my freedom. In the days that followed the wedding, my world was blissfully, unnervingly quiet. It was a new kind of silence, not the tense, waiting silence of the weeks before, but a deep, peaceful quiet. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for years, the dread of the next phone call, the next manufactured crisis, was gone. I had expected to feel a surge of triumph or a pang of regret, but instead I just felt calm. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. Kevin, however, was hungry for details. He called me the next morning. "So?" he asked, his voice practically buzzing with anticipation. "Don't leave me in suspense. What happened after you hung up?" "I have no idea," I told him honestly, and we both laughed. "And the best part is I don't care." But the story, of course, found its way back to me. It came in pieces through the family grapevine. My aunt, the same one who had accidentally told me about the engagement party, called me a week later. Her tone was a strange cocktail of pity and morbid fascination. According to her, the scene at the reception had been exactly the catastrophe my mother had predicted. After I hung up, Beatrice had apparently collapsed into a weeping mess. Miles, faced with a furious venue manager and no financial escape route, had a complete meltdown. He tried to blame the venue, then the bank, then a vague family emergency. Megan, seeing her perfect, Instagrammable wedding imploding, reportedly locked herself in the bridal suite and refused to come out. The venue manager, who had clearly dealt with his share of grifters, was having none of it. He called the police just as he'd threatened. The sight of two uniformed officers walking into the reception sent the remaining guests scattering. In the end, my aunt told me, Megan's parents had to step in. They were mortified, their daughter's fairy-tale wedding having turned into a public spectacle of debt and deceit. They ended up paying the outstanding bill on their own credit card, a gesture my aunt described as being made through gritted teeth. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Megan's parents, having paid a small fortune to clean up the mess, apparently gave Miles an ultimatum: get a real, stable job and pay them back every single cent, or their daughter was leaving him. The pressure caused whatever was left of their fantasy romance to crumble. Megan's social media went dark for 2 weeks. When she reappeared, All photos of Miles and the wedding had been scrubbed from her profile. Her bio no longer read, "Future Mrs. Evans." They were done. Miles, stripped of his fiancée and her parents' financial backing, had to face the consequences of his own life for the first time. He lost his commission-based sales job shortly after the wedding fiasco. With no income and mounting debt, he was forced to move back in with our mother, Beatrice. The two of T. Hem, the architects of my exclusion, were now trapped together in her small rental apartment, their shared delusions of grandeur shattered. I received a few desperate, angry voicemails from blocked numbers, which I deleted without listening to. There were also a handful of pleading emails from my mother, filled with guilt trips, accusations, and half-hearted apologies that all ended with a request for money to get back on their feet. I archived them all, unread. The silence they had imposed on me by not sending an invitation had become my shield. I had simply made it permanent. I did not engage. I did not respond. I did not offer a single word for them to twist or use against me. My silence was my final answer. A few months later, I was having dinner with Kevin when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Miles," it read. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'm in a really bad place. Can we just talk?" I showed the text to Kevin. He raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the message, at the words from the brother who had treated me as little more than a line of credit. I thought about the years of being undervalued, the pain of being so deliberately cast aside, and the profound peace I had felt since cutting them off. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant, detached sadness for the relationship we could have had, the one they had destroyed. But it wasn't my job to fix him. It wasn't my responsibility to clean up his mess. My only responsibility was to myself, to the life I was finally free to build on my own terms. I typed out a single word, a complete sentence in its own right, a word that closed the book on our shared history. "No." I hit send and blocked the number. Then I put my phone away, smiled at my friend, and ordered dessert. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a future that was entirely my own.